Jake Morrison pushed through the glass doors of Riverside Medical Center and walked up to the front desk. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and had that weird, quiet feeling that all doctor offices seem to have. He checked his watch and saw he was 10 minutes early for his appointment with Dr. Linda Hayes. His construction company required all workers to get yearly checkups, and Jake had been putting this one off for 3 months. The nurse behind the desk had short brown hair and looked tired. She asked for his insurance card and driver's license without looking up from her computer screen. Jake handed over the cards and sat down in one of the plastic chairs that lined the wall. The chair was uncomfortable and made a squeaking sound when he moved. He picked up a magazine about fishing from the small table next to him, but could not focus on reading anything. 20 minutes later, a different nurse called his name. She was older and wore bright pink scrubs that hurt to look at. Jake followed her down a hallway lined with exam rooms. The walls were painted a boring beige color and had generic pictures of flowers hanging on them. The nurse stopped at room number 7 and told him to go inside and sit on the exam table. The room was small and cold. Jake sat on the paper-covered table and listened to it crinkle under his weight. There was a poster on the wall showing the inside of a human body with all the organs labeled in bright colors. He tried not to look at it because it made him feel queasy. The smell of rubbing alcohol was strong in the small space. Dr. Linda Hayes knocked on the door and came in carrying a tablet computer. She was probably in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her white coat looked crisp and clean, like she had just put it on. She smiled at Jake and shook his hand before sitting down on a small rolling stool. The doctor asked Jake the usual questions about his health. Did he smoke or drink? Did he exercise regularly? Had he been feeling sick or having any problems? Jake answered all the questions honestly. He told her about his job doing construction work and how he sometimes felt sore after long days of heavy lifting. Dr. Hayes nodded and made notes on her tablet. She checked his blood pressure and listened to his heart with her stethoscope. The metal was cold against his chest, even through his shirt. She looked in his ears and throat with a small flashlight and asked him to follow her finger with his eyes. Everything seemed normal and routine, just like every other doctor visit Jake had ever had. Then Dr. Hayes said she needed to draw some blood for the standard tests his company required. She called for the nurse to come in with the supplies. The same tired-looking nurse from the front desk came in, wheeling a small cart with tubes and needles on it. She wrapped a rubber band around Jake's upper arm and asked him to make a fist. The needle went in easy, and Jake watched his dark red blood fill up 3 different tubes. He had never minded needles, and giving blood had never bothered him. The nurse labeled each tube with his name and date of birth using a small printer that was attached to the cart. She put the tubes in a plastic holder and told him he was all done. Dr. Hayes said the results would be ready in a few days, and that someone from the office would call him if there were any problems. She handed him a piece of paper with instructions about eating better and getting more exercise. Jake thanked her and left the exam room feeling like he had just wasted an hour of his life on something completely pointless. He drove back to the construction site where his crew was working on a new shopping center. The guys asked him how it went, and he told them it was boring as expected. He spent the rest of the day operating a small crane and moving steel beams into place. The work was hard and made him sweat, but he enjoyed using his hands and building things that would last for years. 3 days later, Jake was eating breakfast when his phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Riverside Medical Center. He figured they were calling to tell him everything was fine and maybe try to schedule his next appointment. He answered the phone while taking a bite of toast. Dr. Hayes was on the other end, and her voice sounded different than it had during his visit. She sounded worried or maybe confused about something. She asked Jake if he could come back to the office as soon as possible because there were some unusual results from his blood work that needed to be discussed in person. She would not tell him what was wrong over the phone. Jake felt his stomach drop and his appetite disappeared completely. He had always been healthy and could not imagine what kind of problem they might have found. He told Dr. Hayes he would be there in 30 minutes and hung up the phone. He threw his half-eaten breakfast in the garbage and grabbed his keys. The drive back to the medical center felt like it took forever, even though it was only 15 minutes. Jake's mind raced with possibilities about what could be wrong with his blood. Maybe he had diabetes or high cholesterol. Maybe it was something worse like cancer. He tried not to think about the worst-case scenarios, but could not help himself. When he arrived at the office, the same tired nurse was behind the front desk. She looked up when he walked in and told him that Dr. Hayes was waiting for him in her private office instead of an exam room. Jake had never been to a doctor's private office before, and that made him even more nervous about what was happening. Dr. Hayes opened her office door before he could knock. She looked like she had not slept much since their last meeting. Her usually neat hair was messy and her white coat had wrinkles in it. She asked Jake to sit down in a chair across from her desk and closed the door behind him. The office was bigger than the exam room and had books lining the walls and a small window that looked out at the parking lot. Dr. Hayes sat behind her desk and stared at Jake for a long moment without saying anything. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up a manila folder that was sitting in front of her. Jake could see that the folder was thick with papers and had his name written on the front in black marker. She opened it and pulled out several sheets covered with numbers and charts that meant nothing to him. She told Jake that his blood work had come back with results that she had never seen before in 20 years of practicing medicine. The standard equipment in their lab had malfunctioned 3 different times when processing his samples. Each time the machines would work fine with other patients, but would give error messages and shut down when they tried to analyze his blood. Dr. Hayes had sent his samples to a government laboratory that specialized in unusual cases. The results that came back were so strange that she had called the lab twice to make sure there had not been some kind of mistake. The technicians assured her that they had run the tests multiple times and gotten the same results every time. Jake asked her what was wrong with his blood and why the machines were not working properly. Dr. Hayes looked uncomfortable and told him that his blood contained genetic markers that should not exist in any human being. The markers matched samples that the government had been studying for 15 years from an unknown source. Before Jake could ask any more questions, someone knocked on the office door. Dr. Hayes looked surprised because she had told the front desk not to disturb them. She got up and opened the door to find a woman in a dark business suit standing in the hallway. The woman was tall with short blonde hair and carried a black briefcase in one hand. The woman introduced herself as Agent Carol Bennett and showed Dr. Hayes an identification badge that made the doctor's face turn pale. Agent Bennett asked if she could speak with Jake alone and suggested that Dr. Hayes might want to take an early lunch break. The doctor quickly gathered her things and left the office without saying another word. Agent Bennett closed the door and sat down in the chair that Dr. Hayes had been using. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer along with several photographs. Jake could see that the photos showed what looked like pieces of metal with strange writing carved into them. The writing did not look like any language he had ever seen before. She told Jake that 15 years ago something had crashed in the Nevada desert during a military training exercise. The crash site had been secured immediately, and everything found there was classified at the highest levels. Among the debris were samples of biological material that contained the same genetic markers that had just been found in his blood. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. He asked Agent Bennett if she was trying to tell him that his blood was somehow connected to whatever had crashed in Nevada. She nodded and said that was exactly what she was telling him. According to their records, Jake was one of only 3 human beings on the planet who had these genetic markers. Agent Bennett explained that Jake had served in the military for 4 years after high school. During his service, he had volunteered for what he was told were routine medical studies designed to help soldiers stay healthy in harsh environments. The studies had involved taking experimental vitamins and getting injections that were supposed to boost his immune system. What Jake had not been told was that the military had been conducting secret experiments to see if human genetics could be modified to be compatible with the biological material from the Nevada crash site. Most of the test subjects had shown no changes at all. A few had gotten sick and been removed from the program. Only 3 soldiers had developed the genetic markers they were looking for. The other 2 soldiers with the markers had died in what appeared to be accidents over the past 5 years. One had been killed in a car crash and the other had drowned while fishing alone at a lake. Agent Bennett said the government was now very interested in keeping Jake safe and healthy. She told Jake that they needed his help with something extremely important. The biological material from the crash site was not just random debris. It belonged to a living being who had survived the crash and was currently being kept alive in a special facility. The being was dying, and time was running out. Jake asked what any of this had to do with him. Agent Bennett explained that the being was female and belonged to a species that could only reproduce with genetically compatible partners. Without Jake's help, her species would become extinct when she died. The genetic modifications that had been done to Jake during his military service made him the only person on Earth who could save an entire alien race. Agent Bennett opened her tablet and showed Jake photos of the facility where the alien was being kept. It looked like something from a science fiction movie with white walls and machines everywhere. In the center of one of the photos was what appeared to be a hospital bed surrounded by monitors and tubes. On the bed was a figure that looked almost human, but not quite. She was tall and thin with pale skin that seemed to glow slightly in the artificial light. Her hair was long and silver-colored. Her face was beautiful in a way that was both familiar and completely foreign at the same time. Even in the photo, Jake could tell that she was very sick. Agent Bennett told Jake that the alien's name was Kira and that she was some kind of princess or leader among her people. She had been trying to reach Earth to warn humanity about a threat that was coming from deep space. Her ship had been damaged during the journey, and she had crashed before she could deliver her message. The facility where Kira was being held was located in Nevada, not far from where her ship had crashed. She had been studied by doctors and scientists for 15 years, while they tried to understand her biology and learn her language. Recently, her condition had begun to decline rapidly, and the doctors believed she had only weeks left to live. Jake felt overwhelmed by everything Agent Bennett was telling him. Less than an hour ago, his biggest worry had been whether his cholesterol was too high. Now he was being told that he might be the only person who could save an alien princess and prevent the extinction of her entire species. Agent Bennett told him that he did not have to make a decision immediately, but that time was running out. She gave him a phone number and told him to call when he was ready to hear more details. She packed up her tablet and photos and prepared to leave the office. Before she walked out the door, Agent Bennett turned back to Jake and told him one more thing. If he decided to help Kira, there would be consequences that could not be undone. The process of genetic bonding with her would permanently change his own DNA in ways that no human had ever experienced before. He would no longer be entirely human, but he would gain abilities that most people could only dream of having. Jake spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about everything Agent Bennett had told him. He could not concentrate on his construction work, and his crew started asking if he was feeling sick. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the photo of Kira, lying on that hospital bed surrounded by machines. The image of her pale, glowing skin and silver hair would not leave his mind. On the 4th day, Jake called the number Agent Bennett had given him. She answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting by the phone. He told her he wanted to see Kira in person before making any final decisions. Agent Bennett said she had been hoping he would say that and told him to pack a bag for several days. 2 hours later, a black car with tinted windows pulled up outside Jake's apartment. Agent Bennett was sitting in the passenger seat, and there was a driver wearing a suit and sunglasses behind the wheel. Jake got in the back seat with his small travel bag, and they drove to a private airfield outside the city. The plane was small and white with no markings on the outside. Jake had never been on a private jet before, and was surprised by how quiet and smooth the flight was. Agent Bennett sat across from him and used the time to explain more about what they knew of Kira's species. She told Jake that Kira's people called themselves the Zenthari and came from a planet many light years away. They were an ancient race that had developed technology far beyond anything humans had achieved. Their society was peaceful and focused on learning and exploration rather than war and conquest. The Zenthari had been fleeing their home world when Kira's ship crashed on Earth. Something called the Void Swarm had begun consuming planets in their part of the galaxy. The Zenthari had tried to fight, but their peaceful nature made them poor warriors. Most of their people had been killed or consumed before the survivors could escape. Agent Bennett explained that Zenthari reproduction was very different from humans. They could only conceive children through a bonding process that joined their genetics with a compatible partner. The children that resulted would carry memories and knowledge from both parents. This meant that each new generation was smarter and more capable than the one before. The plane landed at a small airfield in the middle of the Nevada desert. There was nothing visible for miles in any direction, except sand and rocks. A military vehicle was waiting for them and drove them to what looked like a natural rock formation. As they got closer, Jake could see that there was a hidden entrance built into the side of the rocky hill. Underground, the facility was much larger than Jake had expected. The tunnels and rooms were carved directly out of the rock and lined with smooth metal walls. Soldiers with automatic weapons stood at checkpoints throughout the complex. Everyone they passed wore badges with different colored stripes that seemed to indicate their security clearance levels. Agent Bennett led Jake through several secured doors until they reached a medical wing that looked like the most advanced hospital he had ever seen. The air here was different and tasted slightly metallic. She told him that the atmosphere was specially filtered to keep Kira comfortable and healthy. They stopped outside a room with a large window that looked in on what appeared to be an alien medical bay. Jake could see monitors and machines that were clearly not made by human hands. The technology looked organic somehow, as if it had been grown rather than built. In the center of the room was a bed that seemed to float a few inches above the floor. Lying on the floating bed was Kira, and she was even more beautiful in person than she had been in the photographs. Her skin did glow with a soft inner light, and her silver hair moved slightly as if it were floating in water. She appeared to be sleeping, but her face showed signs of pain and exhaustion. Dr. Alan Price approached them from down the hallway, carrying a tablet filled with medical data. He was a thin man with thick glasses who looked like he had not seen sunlight in years. Agent Bennett introduced him as the lead scientist studying Zenthari biology. Dr. Price shook Jake's hand and immediately began explaining Kira's medical condition. In terms that were difficult to understand, he told Jake that Kira's body was slowly shutting down because she had been separated from her people for too long. The Zenthari had a biological need to be connected to others of their species through something Dr. Price called a genetic network. Without that connection, Kira was essentially dying of loneliness at a cellular level. The only way to save her was through the bonding process that would create a new genetic connection. Dr. Price warned Jake that the bonding would change both of them permanently. Jake would gain some of Kira's abilities, including enhanced strength and healing. He would also develop a telepathic link that would let them share thoughts and emotions. Jake asked if he could talk to Kira before making his final decision. Dr. Price looked uncertain and explained that she had been unconscious for several days as her condition worsened. However, he agreed to try waking her using a mild stimulant that would not harm her weakened system. Dr. Price entered Kira's room and injected something into one of the tubes connected to her arm. Within minutes, her silver eyes opened and focused on the window where Jake was standing. Even through the glass, Jake could feel something stirring in his mind as if Kira was trying to reach out to him telepathically. A woman named Dr. Susan Clark came into the hallway carrying a translation device that looked like a small computer tablet. She had been working with Kira to learn human languages and customs. Dr. Clark entered Kira's room and held the device near her face as she began to speak in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. The translation device converted Kira's words into English with a slight mechanical accent. She thanked Jake for coming to see her and said she had been dreaming about him for many nights. She knew who he was and why he was there. She also knew that asking him to bond with her was asking him to give up his human life. Kira told Jake that her people had once been like humans with individual lives and separate bodies. The genetic network that connected them had developed over thousands of years as they evolved. She said the bonding process would not make Jake less human, but would make him more than human. She explained that any children they had together would be special in ways that neither species could achieve alone. The children would have the best qualities of both humans and Xanthari. They would be stronger, smarter, and more capable than either parent species. Most importantly, they would carry the knowledge and culture of the Xanthari forward so that her people would not be forgotten. Jake looked at Kira lying on the floating bed and felt something he had never experienced before. It was not just attraction or sympathy, but a deeper connection that seemed to pull at something inside his chest. He realized that he had already made his decision before he even knew he was making it. He told Dr. Price and Agent Bennett that he wanted to go through with the bonding process. Dr. Price looked both excited and worried as he began explaining what would happen during the procedure. The bonding required both participants to be awake and mentally connected as their genetics merged on a cellular level. The bonding process took place in a special room that had been designed specifically for Xanthari medical procedures. Jake lay on a floating bed similar to Kira's, while Dr. Price attached monitoring devices to both of them. The equipment would track their vital signs and genetic changes throughout the bonding. Jake had expected the process to be painful, but instead he felt a warm, tingling sensation spreading through his body, starting from his chest and moving outward to his arms and legs. At the same time, he began to hear Kira's thoughts in his mind as clearly as if she were speaking out loud. Her mental voice was gentle and musical, like her physical voice. Through their telepathic connection, Kira shared memories of her home world. With Jake, he saw vast cities that floated among the clouds and forests filled with trees that glowed different colors depending on the season. He experienced the peaceful feeling of being connected to thousands of other minds through the Xanthari genetic network. But Kira also shared darker memories of the final days on her planet when the Void Swarm arrived. Jake felt her terror as she watched the swarm consume entire cities and turn living beings into empty husks. He understood why she and her people had fled across the galaxy, looking for a safe place to rebuild their civilization. As the bonding continued, Jake felt his own body changing in ways that were both frightening and amazing. His muscles became denser and stronger, while his reflexes became faster than any human could achieve. His vision improved so that he could see clearly in almost complete darkness. Most surprisingly, his injuries from years of construction work began healing themselves as his enhanced biology repaired old damage. Dr. Price monitored the process from a control room separated from the bonding chamber by thick glass walls. He had never seen anything like what was happening to Jake's genetic structure. The man's DNA was rewriting itself in real time as Xanthari genetic patterns merged with his human ones. The changes were far more extensive than any of the computer models had predicted. After 6 hours, the bonding process was complete, and both Jake and Kira fell into a deep sleep that lasted for 2 days. When Jake finally woke up, he felt like a completely different person. Every sensation was more intense than before. He could hear conversations taking place in rooms far down the hallway and smell individual ingredients in food being prepared. 3 floors below, Kira woke up a few hours after Jake and immediately looked healthier than she had since arriving on Earth. The pale glow of her skin had become brighter and her silver eyes sparkled with energy. She sat up on her floating bed without any assistance and spoke to Jake in perfect English without needing the translation device. Dr. Price was amazed by how quickly Kira had recovered and how dramatically Jake had been transformed. Blood tests showed that Jake now had the enhanced healing abilities that all Zenthari possessed. His strength had increased to nearly 3 times normal human levels. Most remarkably, his life expectancy had been extended to match Kira's, which could be several hundred years. Within a week of the bonding, Kira announced that she was pregnant with twins. Dr. Price had expected a normal 9-month pregnancy, but Zenthari, gestation periods were much shorter than human ones. The babies would be born in less than 3 months and would develop much faster than human children. Agent Bennett visited Jake every day to discuss the implications of what had happened. The ICE government was very interested in studying Jake's enhanced abilities and wanted to understand how the bonding process worked. However, they were also concerned about protecting both Jake and Kira from people who might want to use them as weapons. News of the successful bonding had somehow leaked to other governments around the world. Agent Bennett warned Jake that Chinese Operative Commander Liu Wei had been asking questions about the program. Russian agent Dmitry Volkov had also been spotted near the facility taking photographs and measurements. Jake learned that his enhanced senses allowed him to detect when people were lying or hiding information. He could tell that Agent Bennett was not telling him everything about the security situation. Through his connection with Kira, he discovered that there had been several attempts to break into the facility over the past month. Dr. Susan Clark continued working with Kira to learn more about Zenthari culture and technology. Kira began sharing technical information that could revolutionize human science. She showed them how to create the floating beds and organic-looking machinery that her people used. More importantly, she explained how Zenthari ships could travel between stars. As Kira's pregnancy progressed, Jake experienced many of the same symptoms through their telepathic bond. He felt nauseated in the mornings and had strange food cravings for things that did not exist on Earth. Sometimes he could feel the babies moving inside Kira even when he was in a different room. Dr. Price monitored the developing twins using scanners that had been built from Zenthari technology. The babies were already showing brain activity patterns that were far more complex than normal human infants. They seemed to be aware of their surroundings and responsive to both Jake's and Kira's voices, even while still in the womb. 2 months into the pregnancy, Jake began having vivid dreams about the void swarm. In the dreams, he could see the swarm, approaching the solar system like a dark cloud that consumed everything in its path. The dreams felt more like memories or visions than normal nighttime fantasies. When he described them to Kira, she became very worried. Kira explained that the twins were already developing precognitive abilities that allowed them to see possible futures. The dreams Jake was experiencing were actually coming from the unborn, babies who were warning about the approaching danger. The void swarm had found Earth much sooner than anyone had expected. Agent Bennett confirmed Kira's fears when she brought news that deep space monitoring stations had detected unusual objects moving through the outer solar system. The objects did not match any known natural phenomena and appeared to be under intelligent control. Military scientists estimated that whatever was coming would reach Earth orbit within 2 years. Jake realized that his decision to help save one alien princess had put him at the center of a much larger conflict. The children that he and Kira would soon have might be humanity's only hope for survival against a threat that had already destroyed one advanced civilization. The twins would inherit abilities from both species that might be powerful enough to fight the void swarm. The facility came under attack late one night while Jake was sleeping. Armed men wearing black uniforms and masks broke through the outer security perimeter using explosives and advanced weapons. Alarms began blaring throughout the underground complex as soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Jake's enhanced hearing allowed him to track the attackers as they moved through the facility. He could tell that they were heading directly for the medical wing where Kira was resting. Using abilities he was still learning to control, Jake moved through the corridors faster than any human could run. He reached Kira's room just as the attackers were setting up equipment that looked designed to cut through the reinforced door. Jake's enhanced strength allowed him to tear through the metal walls of the facility like they were made of paper. He disabled the attackers without seriously injuring them, but their presence meant that nowhere was safe. Dr. Susan Clark helped. Jake and Kira escaped from the facility through emergency tunnels that led to the surface. Agent Bennett met them at a predetermined location with vehicles and supplies for going into hiding. She told Jake that the attackers had been sent by people who wanted to capture the twins before they were born. Jake and Kira spent the next month hiding in a remote cabin in the mountains of Montana. Agent Bennett had arranged for the safe house through contacts who specialized in protecting people from government agencies. The cabin was surrounded by thick forests and could only be reached by a narrow dirt road that wound up the mountainside for several miles. Dr. Susan Clark had come with them and helped Kira prepare for the birth of the twins. She had studied Zenthari medical texts that Kira had shared and learned how to assist with the delivery process. The cabin had been equipped with medical supplies and communication equipment in case of emergencies. Kira went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected on a cold morning when snow was falling heavily outside the cabin. Jake felt every contraction through their telepathic bond and had to concentrate hard to avoid passing out from the shared pain. The labor lasted only 4 hours, which was much shorter than typical human births. The first baby born was a son who Jake and Kira decided to name Alex, after Jake's grandfather. Alex had his father's dark hair and his mother's silver eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. The second baby was a daughter they named Zara, which meant bright star in the Zenthari language. Zara had silver hair like her mother, but Jake's brown eyes that sparkled with intelligence. Both babies were larger than normal human newborns and showed signs of advanced development from their first moments of life. They did not cry like human babies, but instead made soft musical sounds that seemed to communicate specific meanings. Within hours of being born, they were holding their heads up and focusing their eyes on faces and objects around them. Dr. Susan Clark was amazed by how quickly the twins developed over their first few weeks. By the time they were 1 month old, Alex and Zara were sitting up without support and reaching for objects with perfect coordination. They seemed to understand everything that was said to them, even though they had not yet started speaking. Jake discovered that he could feel the twins' thoughts through his connection with Kira. Their minds were already far more complex than human children of the same age. Alex showed an intuitive understanding of mathematics and physics that impressed even Dr. Clark. Zara demonstrated an ability to sense things that were happening in distant locations. When the twins were 6 weeks old, they began speaking in complete sentences using a mixture of English and Zenthari words. They asked complicated questions about the world around them and remembered everything they were told with perfect accuracy. Jake realized that his children were developing abilities that surpassed both human and Zenthari capabilities. Agent Bennett visited the cabin regularly to bring supplies and update Jake on the situation with the approaching void swarm. Deep space. Monitors had confirmed that the objects detected earlier were definitely artificial and appeared to be slowing down as they approached the inner solar system. Military leaders were preparing Earth's defenses, but admitted that human weapons would probably be ineffective. General Pete Murphy had taken command of a joint task force dedicated to finding Jake and his family. The general believed that the twins represented either humanity's salvation or its greatest threat. He wanted them brought to a secure facility where they could be studied and controlled by military scientists. Dr. Alan Price had escaped from the Nevada facility before it was shut down, and was now working with a team of international scientists to understand Zenthari technology. He sent messages through Agent Bennett asking Kira to share more information about weapons that might be effective against the Void Swarm. Kira was reluctant to help develop weapons because her people had always been peaceful. However, she began, teaching Jake how to interface with Zenthari technology using his enhanced genetics. She showed him how to operate devices that could manipulate matter at the molecular level and create energy fields that defied human understanding of physics. When the twins were 3 months old, they demonstrated abilities that shocked even their parents. Alex created a small ball of pure energy using only his thoughts and maintained it for several minutes before letting it dissipate. Zara showed Jake and Kira visions of events that were happening hundreds of miles away by projecting images directly into their minds. The first alien refugees began arriving on Earth while the twins were learning to walk. Ships from several different species landed at various locations around the planet. Some came seeking shelter from the Void Swarm, while others came to investigate. Reports of successful human-Xanthari hybridization. Many of the refugee species had tried to create hybrid children with other races, but had failed to achieve the kind of genetic compatibility that Jake and Kira had accomplished. The twins represented something entirely new in the galaxy, and other species wanted to understand how it had been possible. Jake found himself becoming an unexpected diplomat, as representatives from different alien races requested meetings to discuss cooperation against the Void Swarm. His enhanced abilities and connection to Kira made him uniquely qualified to communicate with beings that had never encountered humans before. The twins celebrated their first birthday when they appeared to be physically equivalent to human children of about 10 years old. Alex had grown tall and thin like his mother, while Zara remained smaller but showed incredible strength and speed. Both children could now communicate telepathically, not only with their parents, but with each other and with some of the alien visitors. Reports reached the mountain cabin that the Void Swarm had been detected near Jupiter and was definitely heading toward Earth. The swarm consisted of millions of creatures that consumed organic matter and converted it into more of themselves. They had already destroyed several of the outer planet's moons and showed no signs of slowing down. Alex and Zara began working together to solve the problem of how to stop the Void Swarm. They spent hours in telepathic communication, developing strategies that combined human creativity with Xanthari technology and abilities inherited from both parents. Their hybrid nature allowed them to think in ways that no single species could achieve. The decisive battle took place in orbit around Jupiter when Earth's combined human-alien defense fleet engaged the leading edge of the Void Swarm. Traditional weapons proved ineffective against the swarm creatures, but the twins were able to coordinate different alien technologies in ways that confused and disrupted the hive mind that controlled them. Working together from their location on Earth, Alex and Zara created a telepathic network that connected all the different species in the defense fleet. This allowed the various alien races to combine their technologies and strategies more effectively than the Void Swarm could adapt to counter them. The battle lasted for 3 days and ended when the twins discovered that the Void Swarm could be turned against itself by feeding it conflicting information through telepathic interference. The creatures began consuming each other instead of the planets they had come to destroy, and the threat was eliminated. In the aftermath of the victory, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed since that routine visit to Dr. Hayes' clinic. He had gone from being a simple construction worker to being the father of children who had helped save not just Earth, but multiple species across the galaxy. The twins established the first school designed for hybrid children from different species combinations. Other races began attempting their own hybridization programs using the techniques that had been successful with Jake and Kira. The solar system became a center for interspecies cooperation and learning. Jake and Kira worked together to help integrate the various refugee populations into Earth society. Their experience with bridging the gap between human and alien cultures made them natural leaders in the new multi-species civilization that was developing. 5 years after the battle with the Void Swarm, Jake stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting Earth and watched ships from dozens of different worlds arriving and departing on peaceful missions. Alex and Zara were now teaching other hybrid children how to use abilities that were still being discovered and understood. He thought about that morning when he had walked into a medical clinic expecting nothing more than a routine checkup and some paperwork for his construction company. Instead, he had walked out as the father of children who represented the future of intelligent life in the galaxy. Sometimes the most ordinary moments could lead to the most extraordinary destinies.